It is my pleasure to be moderating today's conversation, Grief, a Love and Hate Relationship. This is through the SoundMinds Mental Health Conference, through authentic, transparent conversations with heart-selected mental health professionals, advocates, and people with lived experience who genuinely care. SoundMinds Mental Health Awareness and Solutions Conference is changing the way mental health is shaped and shared in the Black and Hispanic communities by producing events where people come together for education, information, inspiration, and resources. We are big on resources here. We are a community as well here. We are expanding to host conversations in between our annual conferences and today on National Grief Awareness Day. So this is actually our very first webinar, and I am so excited to be moderating. My name is Rachel Brinkley. I am a part of the SoundMinds team. I have been working with the beautiful visionary Tanya Reed since the beginning. So I am so excited to be hosting our very first webinar. So we're going to get started. First, let me set the scene. What are we talking about today? So grief, a love-hate relationship. Believe it or not, grief is an act of love, yet the hold that it can have may make us hate it. Grief impacts all of us at some point, whether through the death of a loved one, a relationship breakup, career changes, health issues. How do we push through? How are we managing? So let's have a needed conversation. We have an amazing panel of both professional as well as personal individuals have experienced personal grief themselves and build something out of it to help both themselves and their communities. So I'm so excited to bring them on stage in a few moments. So we're going to get started with Kevin Carter, MSW, LCSW, has spent his career working to help children, families, and communities heal after traumatic life events, and is deeply invested in the study of grief, particularly the intersection of grief and injustice in the communities of color. As a licensed clinician, social work with a master's in social work, he provides training and consultation in areas of grief, loss, and trauma for organizations and communities, as well as grief support groups, and strives to create supportive and inclusive environments for children, families, and adults. He also provides psychoeducation focusing on the understanding of trauma, grief, stress, healing, and provides, sorry about that, I'm reading, social epidemiology as research and practice fellow, strategic design fellowship at the Lindy Institute of Urban Innovation at Drexel University. Kevin is on the WPSU at Penn State, Grief Initiative Content Advisory Board, reviewing and providing feedback on family selection, as well as ensuring that final videos offer sensitive yet authentic portrayals of grief. Kevin previously served as a clinician director for the Center of Grieving Children in Philadelphia, where he developed and implemented team and agency-wide practices that aided in the promotion of equity and access on behalf of marginalized grieving children, families, and communities. So I am so excited. Thank you so much for joining us, Kevin. I'm really excited to start this conversation. Next, we're going to be bringing on the beautiful KIMBERLY SIMMONS. LCSW is a school social worker, as well as a telemental health therapist. She has always had an interest in understanding mental health, and this curiosity has found its way to her passion and purpose served through her work with youth, adults, and families. KIMBERLY's first real bout with grief came with the loss of her mother in 2014. This experience continues to challenge and define who she has been and who she is destined to be. Beautiful line, beautiful KIMBERLY. KIMBERLY believes in using her experience to affirm and support others through their grief journey. She is a two-time graduate of Florida A&M University, having earned both her Bachelor's of Science in Psychology and Master's of Social Work at this institution. She is also a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Inc. Licensed as a clinical social worker in the District of Columbia and North Carolina, Kimberly is also certified as a youth mental health first aider through the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you, Rachel.
And next we're going to bring on James A. Ingram II, is a seasoned public policy and health advocacy professional who has spent most of his professional career in the field of government affairs and advocacy in Washington, D.C. James received his Bachelor's of Arts degrees in political science and African American studies from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and completed postgraduate work at Georgetown University and the John Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. So excited to talk and hear what all you have to share, James. James is an author of a book honoring Black fatherhood that will be released later this year. He believes we can find strength, purpose, and hope even in the midst of our deepest adversity. In fact, James' personal testimony proves that many gifts can surface even in the midst of traumatic and unexpected loss. He is a spring 1996 initiate of Kappa Alpha. I'm so bad at this, but the Fraternity Inc., a member of the 100 Black Men of Maryland, and a member of the board of directors for the National Young Adult Cancer Organization in Baltimore City. I'm so excited, James. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. And last, but definitely not least, the beautiful Monica Yvonne is the founder and mastermind behind Brains, Beauty, Brilliance, a movement designing freedom in everyday life. She helps individuals strategically embrace opportunities of life and freedom that Yahweh's love brings. Monica is transparent about her battles of mental health when she lost her father. Her experience stirred a fire to help others maneuver through mental health challenges while processing grief. She is a certified mental health first aider and the curator of My Truth About Grief, a program designed to help all individuals process loss in a healthy way. So I don't know about you guys, but I am ready to get started. Okay. So first, we're going to set the scene for each of our panels, and especially surrounding this conversation regarding grief. How has grief affected you and your life? And I guess we can start from the very top, and that would be Kevin.
Thank you, Rachel. As I have the privilege of getting older, this story could get longer, but I'll try to narrow it. Now, I just want to thank you and the team for bringing together community tonight, and I want to really start there. And I'm going to embarrass my panel member, Kimberly, because it was right around the time that I met her when I was on the faculty at Florida A&M Department of Social Work that I was really grappling with as an adult, really grappling with grief issues. And around that time and around the time I was in graduate school, I started to notice some things about my life that were a bit disturbing. Some of it was anxiety. Some of it was, now I know it was trauma responses, but I began to unpack some things. And I want you to think about this. I was a young child when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And during that same time, the same week, my very close uncle died. And during that time, there was a lot of tumultuous kinds of things going on in the country, none of which I really processed until my late 30s. And I began to understand that those things that happened in my childhood, including my grandfather dying, right around maybe within 2 or 3 years of those other traumatic events, had a significant impact. In some ways, I think it may have led to me desiring to help other people. But over time, I've thought about this, and it's kind of a scary thought, but I'm going to share it anyway. Other than spirit, family, and love, I think grief may have shaped my life more than anything else. And why do I say that? Because I'm at the point in which, in my practice and in my life, I'm trying to look at this thing as a universal, as in there's loss every day, but how can I transform that into something that works well for me and doesn't get stuck in my body, so that when I'm around my wife, I'm around my family, I'm an energy that's generative, that's loving and kind. Even though Kim probably would say she didn't see a lot of that when I was teaching, I was a little cranky, but that was that love that was shedding in that love. So to me, grief impacts me on a daily basis because of who I am, what I do, and what I dream about. And what I dream about is our community, particularly African Americans, being able to transform this energy that we have around loss in our life into love and into change and into being the people that we really want to be as individuals and as a collective.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I will pose the same question to Kimberly. Again, how has grief affected you?
Good evening, everyone, again. So for me, my mother's side of the family was really big, but like as far as her aunts. And so, but when I was born, all of them were already deceased for the most part. So for the majority of my life, I didn't experience personal loss. Like here and there, you know, a family friend that you called aunt or uncle may have passed, and it's like, oh, that's sad, but you know, we keep going. So majorly in 2014, when I lost my mother, that was when it was like, whoa, this is what grief is. So that's, you know, my introduction to true personal grief, loss of a loved one through death. I think, you know, grief does exist in various different ways. So I think as a social worker, I have found that there are times that I grieve on behalf of my clients, especially working with high school students. I mean, just today I was listening to a story from a student and I had to try not to shed tears as I'm listening to the life that she has led, the things that she is lacking, per her, you know, wording, and desiring in life. And so I find myself grieving on behalf of my students, of my clients, for the things that they are grieving as well, or don't even know that they're grieving. So between the two, you know, but my mom is like my big time personal grief story.
Thank you so much for sharing. And then next I'm going to go with James. I know you have a book coming out as well, talking about the impact of grief. And even we're talking about that wholeness of what grief looks like, not just losing someone who may be close to you as a family member or friend, but the impact of just grief and in all shapes and forms of it. So please share.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a pleasure to be here for this important conversation tonight. Let me first start out by saying thank you to the organizers of obviously this important discussion. This issue is so timely and so personal to me, and so I'm grateful to be able to offer some of my personal experiences and insights into my journey. So by disclaimer, I have to say I am no expert on grief, but what I know is my journey. And my journey has been so personal to me, and it was one that I never expected to take. But life showed me, that it obviously has a lot of unpredictability. And I found that out 5 years ago when I lost my father very suddenly and very unexpectedly. So my father suffered a massive stroke in front of me, a stroke that would take his life 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later. And I often say that I lost my father twice. I lost him that day, and then I lost him when he permanently left this earth. But the moment that we shared together on December 13th, 2017 was a moment that was so profound prior to his stroke, because I was the last person to ever hear my father speak again, right? So he shared his last words to me And his words were so simple then when he just asked me, son, can you just help me to the restroom? And what I realized even a year or so later when I was processing even that was that there was a depth and a profoundness in even those simple words that he shared to me. So my father was, he was my father, but he was also my best friend. So he was a man that was present every single day in my life for more than 40 years. So the way his death impacted me was in ways that I was not prepared for. And what I had to grapple with was not just his death, but then the traumatic aspect of witnessing my father suffer a massive stroke in front of me. And what I realized along that journey was that, over the past few years was that life was not prepared to support my grief. Right. So, and what I mean by that is that life goes on. And my harsh reality was that life stopped. And when it comes to those types of experiences that bring you heartbreak and confusion. And as I said, like for literally for the first year or so, the one question I often asked myself was why? Why did it happen to my father? Why did it happen to my father and me? Why was it just the two of us? Why was that moment the moment that I heard his last words and all that? So I was trying to process all the emotions and at the same time finding myself trying to defend how I felt to other people who could never understand what that experience felt like to me as his son, witnessing that through my lens, but then also the traumatic experience of losing your father in that way. So it was difficult, and it's certainly been a difficult journey. But what I realized is that even in those moments, you do find hope when you give yourself time, you give yourself space, you give yourself the self-grace that life does not give you. And oftentimes those that you expect to give you the grace and give you that support and give you that, those types of things does not give you that. So you have to find it along the way. So Kimberly, the one thing you shared that I think was so powerful to me was that you said that I never experienced true personal loss like that until you lost your mother. And I felt the same way with me. And so it's been quite a journey, and I'm thankful for the many gifts that have actually surfaced along this journey of grief and personal loss, including having an opportunity to have this conversation with you all tonight.
Thank you so much. So next I want to bring on Monica Yvonne. I know one of her major events that she offers, I believe, every year is My Truth About Grief. If you could share how starting that had supported your grief process.
Thanks, Rachel. And again, hello and welcome to everyone. I just want to applaud you for taking a step to heal from grief, to know what it's about. Perhaps you are experiencing grief or supporting someone that is. And I can tell you that you are in the right place to have dynamic, honest, true, and genuine conversation. As Rachel stated, I do curate an event every year called My Truth About Grief. But before I tell you about that, let me tell you my story. About 8 years ago, when I was 29 years old, I was living in maybe like an hour and a half away from Philly, and I got the phone call that everyone dreads. I got the call from my aunt saying that your dad's in the hospital. I didn't think anything of it. I had just talked to him, had just heard his voice 30 minutes ago while talking to my mom. I drive to Philly. I go to the hospital. I still remember what the security guard said. He said, have you talked to your family? And then I walk in the room, and then I knew by the look of my family member's face that my father had passed from a massive heart attack. Everyone in my family knew, and I didn't. And I am my mom's only child. So guess who got stuck planning the funeral and having to then be the strong one and then being a caregiver and then essentially moving back to Philly into the same bedroom that I grew up in because my mom needed me. I can tell you my journey is being a believer. I believe in God, Jesus. I use Hebraic terms, but that's what it means. What I found was that as a preacher, because I've been preaching most of my life as an apostle or prophet or someone who communicates scriptures to other people and to other leaders, at 29, no one knew how to assist me. No one knew how to help me. And my friends had not lost parents. Similar to Kim, I didn't have any acquaintance with death until it knocked on my door one day. My father's death was the closest death that I ever lost, and I didn't have any previous experience with death, with grief, or with loss. And with me loving God, right, as much as I did and as much as I do, I couldn't fathom the disappointment. And so I started my Truth About Grief simply to provide resources and a safe space to have honest conversations about what wasn't there in church to support me as a leader. What I found was that people cared more about my gift than they cared about my soul. And how I began to heal was I cared more about my soul, because if Yahweh, if Yeshua, or God, Jesus died for me, why couldn't I bet on myself and believe that it was because I belonged to him that I was worthy of healing? And when I decided to take self-care and I began to just be transparent and share my story, because I said I can't be the only one. And so that then birthed my Truth About Grief. And it wasn't just grief of losing a parent. Grief is about any loss, person, place, or thing. It can be relationship, it can be a pet, it can be a job, it can be some form of trauma from the past, similar to what you heard Kevin, who is a licensed professional, talk about, when there's even other traumas surrounding how a loved one might have passed away, or how something, or how you experience the loss. And so my loss and losing my dad, and the support that I didn't have, while people loved me and they cared about me, they just simply didn't know how to help me. And so I had to begin to forgive myself. I had to forgive God. I had to forgive and had to give myself grace to say, you know what, you're worthy of healing and you're worthy of being whole. And so that's how I started my journey. And now I'm able, with a smile on my face, to say to you, I found hope in grief, that there's a point of time that when you journey through grief, you find out that all is not lost. And you find that there's a sense and purpose in you that unfortunately, but still fortunately, if it wasn't for the loss of my father, I wouldn't have this platform to tell you that you can make it through whatever it is that it looks like for you tonight, tomorrow, and the fact that you made it through all the yesterdays that led you to today. So that's my story around grief.
Thank you so much, Monica, for sharing that. So really quick, just to reset the room, we are here talking about grief, the love and hate relationship of it. And we do have our chat open. So if there are any questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to drop that question, drop that comment. We have someone, Ms. Tanya, actually monitoring and watching that. So we really do want to open this conversation up. So what I hear, the panelists saying is that the process of grieving looks and feels different. I recently lost my uncle unexpectedly, and life still happens. So in my process of grieving, I would love to hear from both your personal experiences and those professionals about what does it look like to show up for yourself. And I guess we can go back to Kimberly or Kevin, who wants to drop in. I'll just allow you guys to unmute yourself.
Showing up for yourself is a tough one for me, I think, because I think there was a time that I didn't show up for myself. And so that's the struggle, and that's the space in trying to find, how do I care for myself in this time? When I lost my mother, I just had a baby, and I was living in DC area, and she and my sister were like, hey, come to Greensboro, come here with us. And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go where I'm a part of someone's day-to-day. Like, you have your friends, you have all your people that you know, love, and care for you, but your family is a different kind of responsibility. I felt like, yes, my family is gonna make sure every single day. So I got to Greensboro June 28th, 2014. My mother was in the hospital when I arrived, and she ended up being diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in October and passed on November 17th, 2014. During that time, my sister, who was here during Labor Day weekend, she and her family relocated to New Jersey from North Carolina. So that left me here caring for my mother and a child who was just 1. So I didn't have time to show up for me even after the loss of my mother. I was being a mom. I didn't want energies to be around her. I tried my best to just keep everything quote normal, right? You know, but what is normalcy when your mother is gone, you know? So that's a tough one for me to answer, and just the reality that I don't think I showed up for myself in the way that I should have until last year. Last year was when I feel like I really started taking a turn to say, you know what, get up, you know, get up and do something for you. And, you know, my daughter's 10 now. So it's like, I think her getting to a space of being more independent, dealing with some grief of her own, you know, and having those realistic conversations put me in a better space to start showing up for me. But it's, you know, that takes acknowledgement of what you need, and it takes some support, you know, some encouragement. Sometimes, you know, you can hear 5 people say the same thing, and only one might really get to you and be the change maker that makes you stand up. So listening, no matter where it comes from, and just being open to the possibility of being able to change.
And
Okay, appreciate
I'm
it.
going to say to my colleague, Kim, you showed up the way you could. And that's what I've been learning over time, is that I used to think that as a clinician, I was supposed to be one thing, and as a husband and a son, I was supposed to be another. But really what I've learned over time is I have to put into practice. So if I'm going out talking with kids and caregivers and other people about self-care, I have to. And let me tell you why I have to, because I will not survive the work that I do if I do not. I'm listening to people talk about what James was talking about, and I'm listening to people talk about violent deaths. So I have to do meditation. I have to do boundaries. Um, I have to try to eat right. I'm working on that one. But I have to have a very conscious way of providing energy around me so that I don't take the energy that is not helpful to the people that I serve, but also to the people that I love. I've learned how to say no. I did not know how to say no when I was in Greensboro, working beside Kim in Greensboro, because she went to school, we worked together in Florida, and then in Greensboro. I was just beginning to learn that practice during that same time frame that she spoke about. And then when my father died, a few months before James's father, in 2017, something hit me about this death thing, because when he died, I drove that highway from Philadelphia at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he was with me, and he has not left me. So I carry his presence to the screen. I carry his presence to everything that I do, and I can feel him and I can sense him. So that tells me that there's an openness that I've developed over time that I have access to that will help me heal myself. It tells me that I am healing. And also what I've done is I've learned that healing is a lifetime process. So when I'm working with other people, I'm not pushing them. I'm standing, because I don't want somebody to push me to go do something. I want them to encourage me and support me, but not push me over the edge. So I've learned to not push myself over the edge. I've learned that I can't work my way through this grief by working 60 hours a week. I have to come out of that. And this is one of the larger things that I've learned. I've learned body practice, body awareness, and body practice. And I've learned the practice of somatics, because everything is in a body. It might be an individual body, it might be a family body, it might be a body of church, it might be a body in community, I've learned that we have to figure out individually and collectively how to work through grief in those energies and in those spaces. And that's the way I take care of myself. I do not work all the time, but I'm all the time working on myself.
Thank you so much for that. Because sometimes, just in my recent loss, I find myself, diving into the things that I have to do because it's simpler to keep lifing than it is to sit in that grief and acknowledge that something has been lost, something is no longer with you. And, I would love to bring James on now just to share what that journey is looking like for you as well.
Yes, I appreciate the question. I appreciate all the insights and the personal experiences and perspectives that people have shared. Obviously, prior to this, to what I'm about to say, I'll tell you, it's a journey that is much different than it was after my father had passed. There's much more of a deeper appreciation for the journey and for the grief today. One thing I say all the time is that grief is the most confusing 5-letter word that exists in the English language, and it's the most misunderstood. And oftentimes the narratives that exist come from those that are external as opposed to the person that's actually going through it. And so you almost have to create your own personal understanding of what that journey will be like for you. And so that's why this conversation is so important, because it is love and it does take time. And for me, in terms of the question that you asked, which I think is such a powerful question, how I initially showed up is someone that was not, I was disingenuous to my journey. I was disingenuous to the relationship that my father and I had. As I tried to explain it to those that tried to, that showed some concern, oftentimes it was like me giving them an elevator pitch for everything that I've been going through, because I recognized they only had a little bit of time to hear what I had to say. And then oftentimes they would inject some of what their experiences were in terms of, well, I lost my aunt. Well, your aunt is not the same as this particular situation to me. I respect that, but I lost my father, the man that was in my life every single day, that was present. And separate from that as well, and also related, is the fact that the way I lost him, right? We all will die, as we recognize that, but we all won't have the same experiences with dying. So losing him the way I lost him, very traumatically and unexpectedly, that shook up my world. And so here I was gone for 40 days and I come back to a world that I have no idea how I'm going to exist in, this world of losing my father, trying to fit back into, work and, the expectations that work has, the expectations that life has, picking up the phone to call him on the train back from work, because that was my routine every single day, realizing one day that, very suddenly he's never going to answer that phone again. Right. So those types of experiences. And so it's almost like you have to normalize. And this is why, obviously, this is important. Like, how do we normalize these conversations? How do we normalize what grief means? How do we create outlets for men like, that are on this call as well? Like, how do we talk about these things? Because what I realize is through my loss, my father, I wonder how he ever dealt with the loss of losing his mother and father very suddenly and very early in his life. The outlets weren't there for him, obviously, right? So thinking about how we have those conversations and how we show up in other people's lives that are actually grieving, because it's not what you say, it's how you show up. And that's what I realized then, that I was just being disingenuous. And so what I've tried to do over the past several years is take ownership for my journey and say, you know what, let me create my own personal grace. Let me understand that one day a win is like you wake up and you put one foot in front of the other, but you're getting out of bed and it's winning because you're going to work, you're being functional, you're taking care of certain things, but you're also putting one foot in front of the next. And so the last thing I'll share as well is that first year was extremely hard for me. What I realized after giving myself time is that as we talk on this phone about faith and spirituality and how God shows up, was that God had predestined that moment between my father and me. And so though that first year was me questioning God, why did this happen? Shortly thereafter, I still grapple with many things related to that day, but I also realized that it was a remarkable gift to be there in my father's weakest moment, because I was there to help him. He knew I was there and that I was present. So So I've had to give myself that time and that grace to be able to show up in ways that are authentic to me in my journey every single day.
Do you mind if I add something there real quick, Rachel?
Oh, please do.
You know, James, when you mentioned feeling that you were ingenuous to your relationship with your father, there are times that I have thought back to the day of my mom's funeral and was like, I didn't cry enough. I didn't show enough. Like, do people really know what she meant to me? Because in grief, you know, you deal with the shock. The first couple days and weeks is business. You're dealing with the business of death. And so I was in straight business mode. I remember walking into, you know, the church and where all the family was gathering, and I'm, you know, there are people who didn't know each other, and I'm like, hi everybody, how you doing? Like, here, have you met such and such and such and such? And, you know, my sisters and I spoke, and I thought back like, wow, maybe I should have just lost my whole mind and let it all out. Like, especially, you know, Black community, we jump in the casket, right? So I was like, but she was cremated, so I didn't have a casket to jump into. But I just think back to that, and how did that reflect my relationship with her to those observing, you know? And so I relate to that statement from you. I was like, yeah, I did kind of feel that as well, you know, and just that, and also the responsibility to the person once they're gone. There were things that I like my grief having me sitting, having me not doing, having me gaining weight, having me do all these things. It was like, gosh, I'm disappointing her. This isn't how she wants me to do this, you know, and because they're not here to tell you, baby, it's okay, you're stuck with dealing with what is this person, this energy now, this angel, whatever you call them, feeling about how I'm handling this now too, and how that relates to our relationship. So I yield my mic.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. So again, we're going to reset the room. Once again, the chats, they're chatting. Thank you for sharing your story, your transparency. You know, just starting the conversation, and of course, we're talking about grief, so there is an immediacy of transparency, right? They're responding. So there are a few questions, but we're gonna leave some of those to a little bit toward the end, but continue to drop your questions there. Because now I do want to ask our licensed professionals here, because what we're seeing right now in the news and in culture and the response to the things that are happening, you know, sometimes it feels like every day, all day. How do areas like culture, race, and social location impact our ability to grieve, and how we respond in grieving as well?
I think it's another great question. And what I would ask people to do is just to breathe in for a second, breathe in and out for a second, because we've taken in a lot. And I want to say that one of the major concerns around grief, people have already said it, but you have to always be contextual. So for example, you don't necessarily want to say that African Americans in Tallahassee grieve a certain way. You have to really look at the context, because they might be blocked from grieving and judged from grieving because of the way that society operates around them. And in that way, we talk some about what we call disenfranchised grief. And it's the grief that nobody wants to hear about, because that person was somebody's partner. That person was dating that person, and that person was married, and that person was grieving. That person died as a result of a homicide. That person died as a result of HIV. That person died from suicide. And that grief gets pushed over in the corner because it's disenfranchised. So that's a context that we have to look at. Somebody's boss that they were close to dies. Or let's take it down to the children. The child had a best friend, and the best friend died, and the parents and the rest of the family don't know that they were close, or they may not be close. So that grief is pushed to the side. So we always have to consider context. And context looks like this: it's race, it's gender, it's spirituality, it's geography. Where do people have space to tap into who they really are to grieve? And James is also pointing out another context consistently with us. Do people have the literacy? So the context might be, I'm a 3-year-old. I'm going to back you up even further. There's a 1-year-old in your house. People say that 1-year-old isn't grieving. But let's say that was the mother, or let's just say that was the grandmother who used to come over and provide comfort for the mother. That child is responding to that energy change and that environmental change. So we have the responsibility to kind of look at everything. And I know I'm talking from a professional perspective, but that's really what people have a responsibility to do, to put grief in context. And when you put grief in context, you judge less. And I'll give you another example. The person might die from alcohol poisoning or an overdose. That really changes the way society reacts, but also it changes the way families and individuals act, because you go to that funeral, who's going to want to talk about the addiction or the suicide? So I got kind of excited. I hope I'm answering the question that you asked. And I will say we need to embrace the fact that there's nothing simple about grief, because humans are complex. And you can even go out, you can go outside of the human realm and say, I had a pet that died. That pet wasn't simple. And your relationship with that pet wasn't simple. And we're just in the death realm. We haven't even gotten into the everyday change realm. So I say we want to consider the complexity and the differences, because Kim's reaction to the death of her mother might be different than the death of a grandmother or a colleague or a friend, and they are important. She has to decide how important they are. And then hopefully her family and friends around them, including their employees, will take in consideration that if my uncle who's close to me dies, I need some time off too. So it's like, can we do what Monica and James and Kimberly are talking about? Can we be a more grief-informed society? Until we become one, we're still going to have to be doing this individual work to make sure that we create those spaces in our circles as much as possible. And I'll stop there.
I would agree. I think that, and just to kind of pivot, even someone could have the same loss, like say siblings lose a mother, and we all grieve differently. My sisters and I grieve differently. We receive it differently. We all have our own relationships with our mother. And so we can't categorize what grief looks like for a set people. Some of their cultures and beliefs can help to inform us of what they may be up against, the expectations of how to grieve and the process. We know that, some religions you have to bury within a certain amount of days. Those things, yes, okay, if you're this religion, we know that you're doing this, but how we feel it, how we, experience it, our emotions that come with it cannot be categorized by race, gender, sexual orientation, anything. I think if anything, culture, race, and all of that almost puts pressure on us for how we grieve. Similar to what I talked about, was I supposed to jump in the casket? I remember my mother was kind of in her, weaker days as she was, going through it. Some things that came to mind were, my mother suffered a stroke. She had kidney failure and then, cancer. So I've seen her survive all these really big things. So I even looked at her, Black woman, superwoman syndrome. And I was like, where's your fight? What is this? So that piece of culture of expectation for her to be able to push through hit me and how I responded to her pain. My godmother came and said, Kim, did you release her? That's the expectation of that, community. Hey, you got to release her. She's holding on for you. You got to release her. And I was like, release who? No, she's not letting her go. And I had to process that in my own way. So then where I did, talk to my mother was Episcopalian. So when we knew that the day was coming, we had the priest come do the last rites and all that kind of stuff. And on that night, I did end up talking to her and saying, and I said, I don't want you to go, but you have prepared me. I'm okay. So that piece of culture of releasing the thought of, oh, they're gone to a better place. What's better than being with me? So we're supposed to or expected to, based on cultures and beliefs and things, to say these things and believe these things wholeheartedly. And if we don't, then we're wrong. We're not believing in God. We're not believing in heaven. We're, all of these pressures of Christianity or whatever faith you follow, to believe a certain thing. And so these cultural beliefs, these racial beliefs and things put the pressure on how, and then that makes us to suppress our grief. And so that's how we get people who are filled and suffering and suffocating with grief, because they're trying to figure out the proper way to grieve instead of the personalized, individualized way, and knowing that that's okay for it to be about you.
Oh, that hit so many chords for me, Kimberly. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just recently, again, I lost my uncle, and it crushed me because I prayed and I said, I prayed with an expectancy. He's going to be okay. He just needs some time. He just needs some rest. He's going to be fine. I walked away and I felt that peace, like, yep, it's going to come through. So after losing him, there was this immense disappointment in my ability to pray, my ability to touch God, touch and hear clearly from God. And I think that was louder than grieving the loss of my uncle. The disappointment of not having the power to pray with an expectancy. So thank you so much for that. And I do have a question for Miss Yvonne. What can people do who identify as Christian or faith-based individual do differently to address the disconnect you describe and experience in your journey?
Okay, so one of the things I can say that we can do, and things that I personally done, and I'm not going to tell you to do something that I haven't implemented in my own life, was one, go to therapy. Yes, I believe in prayer. I believe in healing. I believe in deliverance, but I believe that there is multiple forms that it can manifest in your life, and going to a licensed professional is one of them. Sometimes, if you want to call it the Black church or even the church at large, we demonize going to counseling, thinking that Christ alone should be enough and that we don't need anything else. Although we read about the doctors and we read about the judges and the lawyers and all the different occupations that the Father would have on earth, but somehow when it comes to loss, it doesn't apply to us, that his Holy Spirit is just enough. And I truly believe it was my ability to be able to go to counseling and saying that I need help, seeking resources that empowered me in my healing, helped me along my journey. What counseling and therapy did for me and coaching did for me was, one, it helped me to verbalize and have terminology to my feelings. One of my biggest frustrations was that I couldn't communicate how I felt. So if someone really wants to genuinely help me or wants to listen to me, I didn't know what to say because I was so bottled up with emotions that I did not have words to articulate how I felt. So when I was empowered with words and I was equipped with the resources to give me words to my feelings, I was empowered to, one, then set boundaries with people. When I did, I was able to acknowledge when something wasn't working or a conversation wasn't working. And though it took me time, in time, I was able to build a confidence to be able to choose me. I think in church, we think that when we say we choose God or we choose the Father, that we can't choose ourselves in the process, that somehow choosing us and choosing our betterment and choosing and I don't want to say self-help, but choosing self-care and self-love means that we're prideful. And that to me is contrary to scripture, because I can't believe that I serve a Christ that died, but then I don't take care of my mental health and I don't take care of my heart. And I don't believe that I'm worthy of healing, no matter whether I hear it from a preacher over the pulpit or I lay on a couch to get what I need. And so I think that's what we can do. We can stop demonizing the resources that the Lord put on earth to be able to help us. And so that's part of the reason why we don't have community, because now we are performing. What I got lost in was a sense of people performing. You preaching good, but you broken, and you don't want to talk about your brokenness. So I talked about mine, and I got free in telling my story. And so I got free in sharing and transparency. And when I broke out of a shell of religion to get to relationship, I saw my own value and I saw my worth and I saw what the Father actually did for me. And I can relate to Rachel. I can tell you in the past 3 months, even like 3 weeks ago, I buried my uncle. I've had 3 uncles die in the past 6 months, 2 of them back to back to back. I buried 4 family members in the past month. And so what we can do is give ourselves grace. And I know we'll probably talk about it. I call it the struggle of being the strong one. Perhaps in our community, if you've gone through a loss and grief, you're often called on to say, I haven't been the person who's experienced it. I haven't been there. What can I do? So now, even in my grief, I have to somehow have been healed and whole enough in my journey to be strong enough for the rest of my cousins who buried their fathers, because they did. For the rest of my cousins who buried and saying, how do I plan a funeral? How do I do this? How do I care give? I don't know. I'm about to lose my mind. And so the disconnect is that, one, I'm not going to demonize how the Father chooses to heal me, and that I get to speak up and choose me and be able to choose my assignment. I am worth the healing. I am worth this journey, and I'm worth the hope that I believe that grief has given me. This wasn't overnight. It's taken, you're listening to me, 8 years going on 9. I can also say to be kind and sensitive to what I call the year of the first. And what I say is the first birthday, the first anniversary, the first holiday, the first. My first year or first few years, I avoided the card aisle like the plague. Anything that said Father's Day, I did an about face. I didn't go to church on Father's Day. I didn't want to hear about it. And then I realized that even some of my healing came from when I eulogized and I officiated funerals after that. And it was a trial and error of what I thought I could do. But that was the question between the church, is that you got to have a real relationship. And sometimes you have to block out the noise of people who say you don't need these resources over here. I'm here to tell you that that is a lie. Like any person who tells you you don't need counseling, you don't need therapy, you don't need these things, you can just pray it away, that it's more than that. His answers show up in the form of people, and it shows up in the form of resources. You don't have to struggle if you have access to resources. And that's why we're here today, to give you access. And I think that's what the church could be doing, or kingdom believers could be doing better, or pastors could be doing better, and being transparent. Another thing is, if you are a leader or a leader in the spiritual community, sit down if you're broken. So many pastors buried so many people during the pandemic, left and right. And can you imagine a pastor, or even a younger, older pastor, or more seasoned pastor, or parishioner, or leader, even CEO, and your people are dying? What do? There was no one for you to call. Nobody walked through a pandemic. And so sometimes you have to be able to sit out your assignment so that you can show up for your assignment. And so even in church, sitting out, I set myself down from preaching so I could heal. It was no point in me preaching broken. It was no purpose of preaching and telling you to do something that I hadn't lived out in my own life. So for 2 years, I didn't say anything for nothing. I just sat in someone's pew and said, Father, I need you. And that was after I cussed him out. That was because I cussed him out. Okay. I told him if I could have a brick and throw it to heaven to beat you in the face with it, that's what I would do. Because I was angry, I was mad, and I was disappointed that in all the stuff of how much I loved him, that he could take my father. I could even experience the things with Rachel, where she said, I thought my prayer would be enough. I thought that my faith would be enough. But somehow in his infinite wisdom, I couldn't see it then, but I see it now, that I was still enough then, and I am enough now. And that nothing in that moment, in my father's last breaths, would have changed anything. He died, but I didn't. That was his moment. That was his end, but it was a moment for me. And so I think if we can be more inclusive and, like Kevin said, contextual about how we handle the moments afterwards, that there's still life after death and life after loss.
Wow, powerful. Thank you so much, Monica. Now I want to bring James on, because I really want, from my vantage point, I see a lot of pressure on Black men and Black fathers, especially in the grieving process, because you're still expected to show up strong, fierce, powerful warriors. And there's still this rumor that you can't mourn, like you can't feel. And I would love to hear, how you handle those pressures as a Black man and a father.
Yeah, and so I didn't become a father until a year after my father's passing, which clearly was a gift, and obviously God knew what we needed. So but speaking that first year, the pressure of just being a Black man carrying this inordinate pressure of trying to grapple with your emotions of loss, and just it was overwhelming. And so to the point around counseling, Monica, that you talked about, I describe it as 6 weeks after losing my father, I was sitting on the couch waiting to meet a man I'd never met before, to talk about a man I would never see again. And so that started my journey with grief counseling. And I talked openly about it, for several years, going every single week, sitting on the couch. And many of those weeks I was just crying. I couldn't put two words together oftentimes, but just to be able to sit across from someone else that's looking me directly in the eye and giving me the time to express my emotions, to be able to express the pain of traumatic loss, to be able to try to process and reconcile everything that I was feeling, because I recognized when I left that room that oftentimes I couldn't reconcile it, right? And oftentimes, again, it wasn't the ability to share these types of things where it would make sense to other people, or even to get the time and the compassion to be able to have those types of discussions. So a lot of pressure, and to be honest with you, majority of my friends, even talking about counseling, was not something that they did. It wasn't something that we talked openly about. And so the reason why I talked a lot about it and just being open to it, and really kind of expressing, my journey with it, and just the transparency around it, was that we got to create these outlets to, kind of break the stigmas around counseling and therapy and everything that's been shared in this particular discussion. Like that was my, obviously God, but then my questions around why, like I needed that pragmatically for me. I needed to be able to kind of have that outlet to be able to talk about what I was going through every single day, and the pressures of so many different things, as you were saying, trying to show up and be this person, and the realization that is, that life was not compassionate to that. So you have to create that space for yourself to show yourself that compassion for what others won't show you. I know I was closed off. I closed myself off because for some of those discussions that, for me, I describe it as this. I recognize after my father passed the trivial versus the tremendous, right? And I had to separate those. And so with that process, I closed out a lot of relationships that were trivial. I closed out a lot of interactions that felt trivial to me because I wasn't in that space of trivial conversations and trivial, relationships. I needed people to understand the depth of this, even if you couldn't just show up and try to exercise this natural curiosity to understand what my journey's like, and what I'm enduring. And so with that, there was a lot of pressure. And so that's why counseling has been important to me. That's why the foundation of everything we've talked about in terms of our spirituality, our faith. And I can say as well, because I write about this too, at some point, my faith and my faithlessness crossed in the middle of the night. And I had no idea who was going to win, because though I trusted God, the reality was that I didn't trust God in certain aspects too. And I didn't want to show up like, everything is good and then I can recite all these scriptures and that my father was in a better place and all these other things that people give you. And it was like, that's not what I want to hear, because that's not where I'm at. I can be faithless, but still be faithful. Right. So the pressures that I was dealing with then are still, relevant today as a Black man, as a Black father. Now being a Black father, I recognize the responsibility of even talking to my son about vulnerability, about, these types of things, even though he's only 4, but understanding what it shows, what it means to show up and kiss your son and just hold his hand and exercise vulnerability so he understands what that looks like. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much. I love that trivial versus tremendous. It's a way, because I mean, usually those critical moments, right? That's when you really have to identify where's the value added? Is it really impacting me? Is it really doing something? Or is it just something that I do because it's something I've always done? So you really start to cut your losses when you're in those very traumatic or very trivial, or not trivial, very pivotal moments. So thank you so much for that. So we're going to go to the chat, because again, the chat is chatting, and I am so excited to read a few of these. We're going to try to get through all of them. We have some time. So Paul Montgomery, thank you all for creating this safe space. I lost my father in 1987. And I wish I had a space like this to discuss my feelings. By the way, this is James' nephew, so he can truly relate to his journey. So he has a few questions. My mentees, age 17, 15, and 13, lost their mother suddenly in January 2022, then their grandmother, with whom the eldest lived with. Can you provide any advice to how a mentor can offer appropriate support words and counsel to their mentees?
I can start that. I forgot the person's name who asked the question. What was
It was
the name?
Paul.
Paul,
Paul Montgomery.
you're already doing it, Paul, because you have mentees and you're there for them and you're providing that space and support. And I think, again, you don't want to pressure, but conversations about loss, conversations about things they're interested in, as long as you stay in dialogue with them and you mention these things and you ask about those concerns, I think that would be helpful. I think part of what we ask people to do is that before you open up something, know what the resources are. So are there resources for them to tap into in the particular area that you live in? Those could be in the spiritual community, could be in the school community, because some youth want to talk about it, some don't want to talk about it. And then also being able to look at, are there family rituals that are recognizing this loss, and can they be involved in those? And what can they do that's natural to them to be able to not just speak to the loss, but be engaged in remembering that person. And then if it gets to the point where you need additional support, try to find like children that can support them in a structured group if that needs to happen. I think one of the things you too want to do too is just look at the environment. How many times do they watch a celebrity or someone dedicate something to their person who was lost? So there are ways of getting with them about what they want to do versus what we want them to do. So I think that's a good start.
Yes, Paul, I would agree with Kevin on, being there, losing a mother, and then you said the grandmother where the one child lived with. So their consistency, their core has been disrupted. And so they need to know that something is going to be there. Someone is going to be there who's not going to leave them. There's that fear of abandonment, fear of loss of something that's so great. So being there and just in that capacity is huge. I agree again, teenagers, sometimes they want to talk, sometimes they don't, but they do recognize real. And so being real with them and sometimes just asking the blank question, how can I help you? What can I help you do? Again, finding those things that they want to do to acknowledge the loss and what that looks like for them. And it may come up in times that you didn't even expect. You all might be in a movie and then, movie triggers something in them and then that brings conversation. And so, it's also just kind of preparing yourself to be ready for the conversation when it happens, to make sure that you're ready to be open, a listening ear, and helping support them in whatever way they deem necessary.
I would even add, which is the biggest thing, what you're already doing, stay consistent. Stay consistent. Stay consistent. There may be times you may not have the answer, and that's okay. But with so much loss, the security and the stability of consistency is what's needed from a relational standpoint and what is very helpful. And so if you can maintain your consistency as they grow and as they mature, one of the things when they look back, they will always say, he was consistent. These conversations were consistent. And as they are mature enough to handle or have capacity to speak in a clearer depth of how they feel, they'll more than likely run to you because you've been consistent. And so then, even as Kim said, being prepared, because at least they'll come to a consistent source that's going to have a consistent answer, and that trustworthiness out of their brokenness that they're experiencing that they have with you, they'll be able to receive that or be able to maintain or hold tight to your guidance than even someone else who is not as familiar relationally with them.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to, we had one of our attendees post in our question and answer. And again, I'm going to go back to the chat. They're listening and they are responding. So there are some great points that they're making and they're catching and they're collecting here. So this is all so rich. Wow, Kim, remembering your mom is tough. I can't imagine how you and your sisters feel. Thanks. We have so many thanks. So I want to go into Latonia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And your question, my aunt, whom I was extremely close to, passed away suddenly at the age of 59 2 years ago. We talked daily. A few days before she passed, she shared with me how she hadn't felt loved by her spouse or 2 sons in the years. She shared how lonely she was and how her husband put ministry before her. So my heart hurts deeply because I know she died sad and heartbroken. How can I move forward? I pray daily and I love the Lord, but my heart hurts and I'm in shock that 3 months later, her husband was, it ended a little abruptly. So what she's asking is, how can I move, especially when you bear witness or hear that someone's prior to passing was having so many difficulties or challenges, or there was some sadness.
So I actually sent her a private answer to that question, so I don't mind, sharing that openly as well. And so everybody else can chime in also. So one thing that I said to Latanya was, first, my condolences for the loss. And then I also, just stated, we always have to focus on the things that we can control. I always say control the controllables. And so what someone else did is not your burden to carry. What, she mentions you talk daily, all these things. So while she may have felt a lack of love from her husband and her sons for some years, she didn't say that it was something she always felt. And if nothing else, again, controlling the controllables, you gave her love. You gave her attention. You gave her fellowship. You gave her things that may have filled her more than you even realized. And so she, while some people were disappointing, that doesn't mean that her whole heart was broken. It doesn't mean that, her whole spirit was sad. And so sometimes when the person is gone, we can't clarify. And so we find ourselves trying to determine and translate what a statement may mean and what that looks like. And so then we're in a tizzy trying to figure it out. We're hurting because of what we think they meant and what they might have said and might have felt. And so you have to control the controllables, and that's you and what you did and the goodness that you provided to her life. And then hopefully from that, you find rest in knowing that you have done all that you can do.
And some people, some of us, we continue to communicate. And I know that might seem weird for some people, that you would communicate with someone who's not here in their body. But that might be journaling. It might be speaking to them. It might be looking for messages from them, because the person is not physically here, but oftentimes we talk with people who their presence is still with them. And being able to do what Kim is talking about too is to take those things from the inside of you and put them down on paper, or give them out talking in a group, or give them out to your therapist so that they don't impact your body in a way that's harmful to you. But maintaining the bonds with people who are deceased is quite important for many of us. We just have to figure out how to do that in our own way, and be around people who actually support that, because some people are going to say that's weird, that you're still talking to the person who's deceased. Also, they're going to say it's weird that it's been a year and you're still talking about them. So you have to find that circle of people who can hold you where you need to be held. And then in some ways, and I think Monica and James put this in a great light, sometimes you're going to find a way to give back to those people who are holding you, because you might just hold each other in those private conversations that the rest of your family, the rest of your friends, and your coworkers and other people are not ready to hear.
Thank you so much. So again, here we are. Yes, control the controllables. Some incredible just statement, and I love that this space, a safe space here, we can have these conversations. So continue, chatting as time is getting closer, but we have a few more questions in our Q&A. So Mr. Ingram, James, what would you say to a Black man who is overwhelmingly terrified to open up and address their grief?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I know we have licensed professionals on, so if they want to weigh in as well. I mean, I think in terms of what I would share is, as a Black man is that it's okay to be terrified. I was okay on that first drive down to be able to have my conversations and to open up. I was there were so many thoughts running through my head on that hour-long drive. It was terrifying. I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk about the most painful experience that I ever had gone through in my life. But this, having a realization that it's okay to have those moments of fear and even feeling terrified to have that discussion is perfectly fine, in my opinion. I'll also say, even if it's just moments where you do go and you're just sitting there and you're present, maybe not saying much, but you're there, that's a huge step, because that's a step that so many people are not willing to take, right? So give yourself the grace to go at your pace and your speed for when you want to feel like you're ready to open up and kind of confront those things. That's just what I would share. But again, others may want to weigh in.
I think James is right on point. One of the things that because something in my brain told me I was missing something from a question earlier. I think in context, we have to look at that there is overwhelming grief in the Black community because of early death and because of violence inside and outside of the community. So we have to begin to look at the relative weight that Black men and Black women and children are carrying. So being able to let people know that in your time, you can open up and communicate, but also what is communication? Because they might not be talking, but they might be dancing. They might not be crying, you think, but they're crying when they don't want people to see them. Because many parents are trying to protect their children by not showing those tears, because if they think they cry, they think they won't stop crying. So, so Black men and Black women and Black children feel responsible for other people. So help them expand their alternatives, because a man might not say one word, but he might pray, he might write, he might coach, he might do something that helps relieve that grief in ways, because we kind of privilege words and talking because the larger culture privileges that. Because how many sonnets and songs have you heard without a word in them that can soothe your body and your mind? People tell me my voice is comforting, but sometimes with my wife it's not. So that was just a little joke. So I think the issue is to help them expand their alternatives so that they can choose, because many of us have been forced to do things to take care of ourselves, and oftentimes that doesn't work.
And I would add, when you say you're terrified, identify why. What terrifies you? Once you know what you're terrified of, then you can know what path you need to take to address it. And similar to, Mr. Carter, with the paths, change your perspective. You say, I'm terrified to open up and address it. So what does that look like? It could look like, I want to tell somebody about this person I've lost. So you could see it as just talking about them, not dealing with your emotion first. A good therapist is going to bring it out anyway, but changing your perspective of what tackling grief looks like to you and what will help you, and also again identifying what is it that terrifies you.
Yeah, I would even add that the fact that you're able to say that you're terrified means that you're giving yourself permission to confront yourself. And a lot about grief and healing and journeying through loss, and the process of it is confronting yourself, confronting how you feel, confronting what grief did to your life. And so I just wanted to pause to say and just recognize that you're giving yourself permission to begin the journey and begin the walk in this part of your life, and to encourage you to not be fearful when confronting you, because it's not all bad. And if you give yourself grace, that as you journey through time, you will begin to see the parts of you that was terrified to be, how James said, to be tremendous. So I just wanted to encourage you in that, and even just say, just a round of applause for your bravery and even asking the question.
Yes, that was a phenomenal question. Thank you so much, O. Robertson. So we do have another question, and I have some sentiment to this question as well. And this is from Allie Rogers. I have 3 friends who lost their children suddenly and traumatically. What is the best way for me to support them?
I think that daily walk is what they need. Not knowing them, I'm going to say that because I can't tell you, because I don't know how they're operating and who they are, but consider what the daily tasks of living are for them. And how can you support them in those daily tasks of living, but also how you can continue, as Monica said, to be there for them. Because some of this depends on your relationship to them prior to the loss. It could be a friend that's more of a not close friend that you haven't shared intimate things with. So that might determine a different approach. But I think being there for them in their daily lives, being able to sit when nothing is being said, because nothing needs to be said, and be open to continually assessing, and this is a little tricky part, assessing where you are with your support journey. Because lots of times as individuals and as professionals, we rush in with our agenda before we establish an agenda with the person that we're trying to help. So all of the work that I do in grief work is, what's the co-creation look like? What does that helping look like? Is what I did today okay? Because talking today might be okay, but then if you call them at 5, they're just not ready to talk. And if they're ready to cry, like James said, are you ready to sit? Are you ready to hold? And in the back, looking for resources. And then when you look for the resources, don't hand them to them. You call and vet. And you say, are you all open? Are you taking clients? How much does it cost? When's the next time? So that when she's ready, you can say, I talked to Kimberly Simmons. She's at the counseling center. This is how much it's cost. Can I help you get there? Because we have to do a little bit of homework. All of us have sent people for all kinds of care, and then the place wasn't open. It was too far to go. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to control what Kim said, control the controllable, and not control your friend. Because the last thing they need is somebody to control.
Yeah, I can even add, and especially to what Kevin said, being able to make sense of the resources for your friends. That's literally half the battle. When someone can just show up and just know, and they didn't have to go through the rigmarole or the red tape to get to what they need. But I'm going to share something more transparent and honest, that if you're looking to be there, if you had that kind of intimate relationship with your friend, it means sitting in it with them. But sitting in it means that it's smelly, it's nasty, it's dirty, it can be vile, it's not pretty. And the causes of that can affect your own mental health. And so if you are not necessarily in a position to walk with, or you don't know, I would encourage you to have your own counselor, your own set of accountability, your own person that you talk to, so that you are consistently checking in with yourself to see if there's any part of you that's not ready, that's triggered through what they're going through, or perhaps even overextending yourself and with a right heart and great attention and great intention, but could fail in execution that may actually kind of disrupt the purpose that you want to do. And so I just wanted to be very honest that while being in help, like Kevin said, it's also knowing what your limitations are. Because if you want to just show up and just like, I'm here, but take into account your own life too, because helping is great and people need support. But I believe that one plants, the other waters, and God provides the increase. And so don't put the pressure on yourself to be the planter, the waterer, and the one who provides the increase. It's okay to stick to what you can do and not going further beyond that.
Thank you so much, Monica. So we're coming to a
Sorry,
close.
can I
I
add,
want to thank.
Rachel, sorry. I was just going to say, and also don't wait for the ask, because they may not ask.
Oh,
And so it's just being there, not saying, hey, let me know if you need anything, because that's what all grievers hear. Let me know if you need anything. We need something. So just be there. Don't wait for the ask. Send the dinner, send the DoorDash, send, hey, check your door. There's an Amazon package, whatever it is to provide the things that person needs, whether it be like physical items or the time. So just don't wait for the ask.
fantastic. Thank you so much. So again, this powerful room and the conversations, and in so many ways we touched the surface of a number of topics, and I'm sure we could dive even further. But as we wrap up our webinar, Grieve, a Love and Hate Relationship, I want to give each of our panelists 30 seconds to just share one last thought, maybe something that you want to dive in a little bit more, or just want our attendees to walk away with.
What I want to encourage everyone is, one, if you're in a supporting role, I encourage you, don't tell somebody how to grieve, and do not put your own grief experience to be the same experience that someone else is walking through. It is different. And I also want to encourage you to consider your own mental health. I want to encourage you to choose you and to be unapologetic and to not feel guilty about your healing, about your journey. And I want you to know that you are not alone. You are not the only one, and that you are worthy, even if it means walking away from people and walking away from things. And that grief, while we talked about more of a loved one, it can be relationship, it can be divorce, it can be your job, it can be a pet, whatever that is, you are worthy and value to be able to heal at the time and space that is good for you. Be kind and gentle to yourself and practice self-care.
I would say, so my little thing would be remember your rights as a mourner. Dr. Alan Wolfelt created the Mourner's Bill of Rights, which I love and share with those who I know are grieving. And it states you have the right to experience your own unique grief. You have the right to talk about your grief. You have the right to feel a multitude of emotions. You have the right to be tolerant of your physical and emotional limits. You have the right to experience grief bursts. You have the right to make use of ritual. You have the right to embrace your spirituality. You have the right to search for meaning. You have the right to treasure your memories. And you have the right to move toward your grief and heal. Don't shrink your healing. These are your rights, and you can live within them.
James, were you waiting for me?
It doesn't matter.
The irony for me is that even though we have high death rates, we have great amounts of violence that's coming upon us as a people, this is the best time to be alive because your opportunity to serve and love will never be any greater than the moment right now. I have found that the more I lean in, the more healing comes. And I am honored to be here on the panel, and to see another brother on the other side of that is enlightening too. I'm looking at Monica and James, I think Baltimore and Philadelphia, where there's been all of this going on, and they're still standing. And this is what I want you to know. The children and families that look like us in this city are fighting to do this work, regardless of what people say. It might be in the shadows, but we're doing the work, and I'm excited about continuing it with you all.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly say this has been an amazing night and very enlightening for me. I stand up and proudly say I'm a grief survivor. I own it. I show myself the grace that's necessary for me to continue to smile and honor the beautiful memories that were created even that day of losing my father, but even just over the years of having him present and loving me in my life. I find ways to pay that forward in terms of, my own son and connecting with others as they're going through their grief journey. One of the things that I will share as well is that certainly it's important. Everything that folks have said, I will echo those sentiments, but continue to be kind to yourself, love yourself, go at your pace, be open to counseling, and celebrating the small wins, because those are so important. You define those wins, not, don't let someone else define those for you, and just continue to trust in God. So.
Amen. Thank you so much. Again, you have joined a SoundMinds webinar, Grief, a Love and Hate in Relationship. And again, I want to thank the panelists, Monica Yvonne, Kevin Carter, Kimberly Simmons, James Ingram. This has been a great conversation. And thank you all who attended. Again, those chats were chatting, and I'm loving the transparency. There is, again, I have to repeat, you're not alone in this. There is a community of people that are grieving, and that are supporters of those that are grieving. So please don't be afraid to reach out to someone. Even here at the SoundMinds community, both on Facebook and Instagram. If you're not following, definitely I encourage you to do so. So I will be closing the room, and I thank you all again. Have a good night.